And to our interview with Vice President Dick Cheney, I spoke with him earlier today in his ceremonial office at the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, which is next to the White House in Washington. Mr. Vice President, welcome.
It's good to be back, Jim.
Thank you, sir. Yesterday, President Bush said that he will leave Washington next week with a great sense of accomplishment. Do you feel the same way?
I do.
Why? Explain.
Well, I think there are a number of areas where we've had a significant impact on events or on the course of history, if you will. The one that stands out in my mind that I think is most important is something that didn't happen, and that's the fact that we were able to interrupt, block, defeat all further attempts by al-Qaeda to launch mass casualty attacks against the United States after 9/11. That's taken some very tough decisions by the president, some great work by a lot of folks in the intelligence services and the military and so forth. But I look at that and the lives that were saved and the threats that were defeated as probably our greatest achievement.
And you feel it's actions that you took, the president took, the administration took, resulted in this happening. In other words, prevented these further attacks. There would have been further attacks had you not been there and you'd not taken action.
Yes, sir. I can go back and a lot of the details are still obviously classified, but what we did in effect was in the aftermath of 9/11 and 02-03 time frame, when we first began to capture high-value detainees, senior members of al-Qaeda like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed or Abu Zubaydah, we then were able to interrogate them and collect intelligence from them, both about the al-Qaeda organization generally, how they functioned, who they were, where they came from, how they were financed, but then also to get specific intelligence on prospective attacks and allow us to go out and wrap up, capture, arrest others. And that list is very impressive.
And if that had not happened, you think there would have been further attacks?
There's no doubt in my mind there would have been.
Serious attacks of the level like 9/11?
Serious attacks, well, plans, for example, to fly an airliner into the tallest building on the West Coast. Plans to develop a so-called dirty device to be detonated someplace in the United States. Plans to hijack aircraft that were all headed for Heathrow and then to capture them, blow them up over Heathrow, and plans to launch aircraft that they'd captured in Europe and destroy them as they came into the United States. I mean, it was a robust set of programs. There were other regions of the world that were involved as well as the United States. We got a wealth of information from those programs that are the source of some controversy, obviously. But we did not have a lot of information on al-Qaeda, on 9/11. It was very important that we develop it in the aftermath of 9/11, and we did.
The president has also said that he made some mistakes in the last 8 years. Did you make any?
Well, make mistakes. I can think of places where I underestimated things. For example, talking about Iraq, the extent to which the Iraqi population had been beaten down by Saddam Hussein was greater than I anticipated. That is, we thought that the Iraqis would be able to bounce back fairly quickly once Saddam was gone or the new government established and step up and take major responsibilities for governing Iraq, building a military and so forth, and that took longer than I expected. I think that what happened in Saddam's reign, as well as what happened back in '91, when after the Gulf War there was an uprising in Iraq that was brutally crushed by Saddam. I think that eliminated a lot of the people that were potential leaders. If they'd stuck their heads up, it had been chopped off. And if I were to look for one where there was a miscalculation on my part, I think I underestimated the difficulty of getting an Iraqi government stood up.
When you look back on that, why? How did that miscalculation come about?
Well, we didn't have that good of intelligence, I don't think, with respect to sort of the state of affairs inside Iraq. A lot of that had been wiped out over the years. Saddam Hussein was so brutal, killed so many people, slaughtered so many innocents, that it had a lasting effect on Iraqi society that was greater than I expected.
Is it fair to say then that the miscalculation resulted in the chaotic situation that existed immediately after for a while and got immediately after the invasion and all that sort of stuff?
I can't say that. I can't link those two particular points. What I can say is, I think if we had been able to move more rapidly to stand up a government that was capable, I think we might have avoided some of that. But I don't want to blame all that on the Iraqi government. It was a difficult situation, but it was successful. We now find ourselves in a situation where 5 years later we've achieved most of the objectives that you would have set out in the spring of '03 when we launched into Iraq. We've got the violence level down to its lowest level since '03. We've got had 3 national elections, a constitution written, a new government stood up, a new army recruited and trained, the Iraqis increasingly able to take on responsibility for themselves, and we've now entered into a strategic framework agreement with the new Iraqi government that'll provide for the ultimate withdrawal of U.S. forces. You could not have asked for much more than that in terms of the policies that we started on in '03.
Well, Mr. Vice President, getting from there to here, 4,500 Americans have died, at least 100,000 Iraqis have died. Has it been worth that?
I think so.
Why?
Because I believed at the time that what Saddam Hussein represented was, especially in the aftermath of 9/11, was a terror-sponsoring state, so designated by the State Department. He was making payments to the families of suicide bombers. He provided a safe haven and sanctuary for Abu Nidal and other terrorist operations. He had produced and used weapons of mass destruction, chemical and biological agents. He'd had a nuclear program in the past. He'd killed hundreds of thousands of his own people, and he did have a relationship with Al-Qaeda. Now, we've had this debate, it keeps people trying to conflate those arguments. That's not to say that Saddam was responsible for 9/11. It is to say, as George Tenet, CIA director, testified in open session in the Senate, that there was a relationship there that went back 10 years. So this was a terror-sponsoring state with access to weapons of mass destruction, and that's the greatest threat we faced in the aftermath of 9/11. That the next time we found terrorists in the middle of one of our cities, it wouldn't be 19 guys armed with airline tickets and box cutters. It would be terrorists armed with a biological agent or maybe even a nuclear device. And so I think, given the track record of Saddam Hussein, I think we did exactly the right thing. I think the country's better off for it today. I think it's been part of the effort alongside Afghanistan to liberate 50 million people and establish a vibrant democracy in the heart of the Middle East. I think those are major, major accomplishments.
Speaking of Afghanistan and miscalculations, do you consider it a miscalculation to have gone into Iraq before Osama bin Laden had been found, arrested, killed, before Al-Qaeda had been completely destroyed, before the